No mic's working. Okay, everyone, please settle in so that we can get started because um, anyone who's lurking for Nawazuddin Siddiqui should just leave. You can come back later. Um, okay, my name's Samit Basu. I've written several books myself. This panel is not about me, fortunately. I have the great pleasure and privilege of sitting here with two of the absolute best and most interesting writers working in India today. And I'm not saying this just because they're right here. Um, both Prayag and Manu are, of course, very well known in their various avatars, not just as novelists, but also they've had very successful and distinguished careers and continue to have very successful and distinguished careers as journalists, as columnists. Manu used to edit Open Magazine, Prayag used to edit Sunday Guardian. And yeah, yeah, we'll wait a bit. Yeah. Yeah, would everyone just look at everyone who's standing until they sit? We start slow and listen. This was Manu being a schoolman. All right, so let us actually just start. So, and again, we'll keep rotating the strike here. So I'm going to throw out questions, and you guys take it wherever you like. Or I can go Prayag. What about you, Manu? What about you? If you prefer to start off that way. Um, Apart from these various other hats, I hope you've read their books as well. If you haven't, you should. Manu has written Serious Men, which was 2010. After that, it was The Illicit Happiness of Other People, and now Miss Laila, Armed and Dangerous. Prayag has written, Miss. He says it's Laila, though it says Leela or Leila. We'll discuss this. It's his debut novel. Both of them have won awards. Both of them have won much acclaim. So today, both of them also lead fairly active lives online, not just as columnists and journalists, but also on social media where they can be seen fending off attacks from multiple people. Um, and it's with this role and with their roles, as former and working journalists and balancing that with writing novels that I want to start off. As newspaper editors or magazine editors specifically, the curation and placement of stories is something that you've obviously had to think a lot about. Why a story is important, why it works, which story to tell, and so on. Which means that you're also professionals in the art of compressing stories to their essentials and seeing what to put in, when to put it, and why. So, when you're writing novels, and you have to go through the same questions but from through a very different lens. What's the difference? How do you go about it?
Well, I think an important thing from journalism that I learned from my years as a journalist was the importance of brevity. To get to the point quickly and not to not to waffle on. And a lot of novelists do this. There's a lot of verbiage. There's a lot of words are used to express a simple point. And I think it was important for me when I was writing, when I came to fiction, to be as succinct as possible and as direct as possible. I had an idea in place and I wanted to explore it. And, it's not important. And I think Manu's approach and style of fiction is similar to mine in that respect, in that it's a very direct way of looking at whatever the issue is. And I think I got that from journalism, from my years as a journalist, because, no one has time to waste. You have to give the reader that much credit that, not to waste their time. And to say something in 600 words is not easy. To say something in 800 words is not easy. To bring across a really complex point is not easy. And a novel gives you, allows you to stretch your arms and legs and really get into how to get to a point. But at no point should you, for me at least, when I was writing, at no point did I want to waste any words. At no point did I want to just go on for the sake of the beauty of the language, or because you fall in love with the sound of your own voice and you can keep going on and on and on. So I think I got that from journalism.
One thing you see as an editor is a lot of bad copy, and so that trains you to understand writing as a process of also identifying when you're writing a lot of rubbish. And also when you see a lot of rough copy of very serious writers or people who take themselves very seriously, you also are not trapped by the projection of their own seriousness. Because as an editor, you see people in various situations. For example, you don't know a socialist until he asks you for a raise. So you see people and activists and liberals and right-wing guys, all these guys have these identities only for readers. And editor sees them almost naked, actually. I'm being very metaphorical, though you never know what can happen in Delhi. So that and also the sheer amount of news you have to consume. You have a lot of respect for facts. A lot of people in fiction uh, who are not journalists, they waste a lot of time trying to make up things, while real life is very interesting on its own. Like for example, recently one of my favorite stories is how some Indians in some villages, they are sending their parents into the forest to be eaten by tigers, because people who are eaten by tigers, the family get a compensation. I mean, why do you need magical realism when there is India, you know? And even like for example in Tamil Nadu, when there's no water, they'll give you pots, as an election gimmick. So there is a lot of respect for reality and facts. And even though you're writing fiction, you know that facts alone are enough.
Hey, so in case there are people here, and I suspect there are, who haven't read these books, I just wanted to give you a brief description of these books. It's an act of great cruelty to ask a novelist to tell you what their book is about. So I'm going to misrepresent it at will, but because I have nothing at stake emotionally here. So both these books can be called, though I think they both prefer it if you didn't, they could be called dystopian works. Prayaag's has been called science fiction, which I think has ambivalent feelings about. I think both of them would cringe a bit if you said literary fiction, because it's an uncomfortable yes, but does that sound a bit strange? What they unambiguously are, though, is very political novels about present day India. And a novel is never really about something, but present day India is like that large uncle present in the party who's making everything about himself. So you could write about a dozen things, but um, everyone is going to filter whatever they read through the lens of what is happening now. And both these books are quite extraordinary in the way that they capture and encircle present day India. So Manu's book is about, there's many things happening. There's a building collapsing. There's a potential terrorist plot. There's a great leader with 56-inch chest. There's a prankster who likes to get under the skin of liberal icons, and there's a whole CBI situation going on. Events career towards a climax. It's not a thriller in the thriller mold, but things move very fast and a lot of things happen. And Prayag's book is about a young girl who finds herself thrown out of the upper class existence she's very comfortable with, and having to undertake a massively emotionally searing journey through a terrible landscape which talks about present day India while not being set in present day India, because it could be in the near future, but it's all happening now. So when you're writing about present day things, as people whose job has often been to chronicle present day things, there's a problem that you face in that, like the scene you just described where people are sending their parents off to be eaten by tigers. Reality doesn't have to adhere to internal logic, but novels do, right? So when you're making it make sense, how do you try and do this?
How do you make sense of the reality that you're converting?
I mean, how do you decide how to capture the reality of present day India, if that is one of the challenges that you did set yourself?
Yeah. I think a novel can begin for various reasons. It can start with a sentiment, a very strong emotion that you feel, and also it can also be a kind of a rage which you've been feeling for a while and you can't get rid of it. It can also be about love and many things. I don't think a novel begins from one thing. It is, in fact, when I started this book, I had just had to resign as the editor of a magazine because things were getting very hot. As he said, there was a person with a 56-inch who was rising. I think it's 56-inch waist. I think it was misreported. Uh, and everybody was getting nervous, and the mediascape had changed. And I thought this is a very interesting character. Um, and I could not get the idea of putting Modi in fiction out of my head. Though I should insist that all characters in my book are fictitious, but I was just inspired by the most interesting man at that point in India. So it began from there. It's like, how do you put Modi in fiction, and what are the then there's a whole lot of things happen when you make a decision like this, and then you just go with the flow.
I think it's interesting what you're saying. For me, when I started writing the novel, I was, as you said, it's about this woman she's searching for her daughter. She's separated from her daughter, and this city that's kind of falling apart, and she can't recognize the city anymore. The city that she's sort of grown up in and is very comfortable in, and has this upper class existence. And and she's suddenly separated from her daughter, and her husband is killed, and she's searching for her daughter in the city. And when I started writing it, I was trying to examine a kind of liberal hypocrisy that we have. We believe ourselves to be liberals, and we believe ourselves to want the good of all men and all women, everyone around us. But in that same way, we live in a very fractured society. We live in a society that is really driven by a lot of class distinction, that's really driven by caste distinction. Our cities are kind of, I live in Bombay, and I grew up in Delhi, and I feel both those cities are kind of segregating in on themselves. And I'm happy to see that in Calcutta it doesn't seem to be like that. But it was in Bombay especially, the city is kind of like really dividing in on itself, and people are obsessed with living with their own kind, as if there is such a thing. So if you're a Muslim, you live in a Muslim building, and if you're a Gujarati, you live in a Gujarati building, and then you have all these kind of dietary restrictions and things like that, and according to where you live. And this idea began to fascinate me. I really started to think about it. What does it mean if we allow our societies to fragment in this way? If we allow our cities to fragment in this way, what does it actually mean? And what does it say about us as a society, as a people? And what are the impacts that it could have? Going down the line, how devastating an impact it can have on just one person, on just one family. And of course, this is as you said, it's kind of a dystopic novel, and this whole city is fallen apart. But for me, it was very important to examine just this one woman and her life, and this impact of all of this devastation on her. I set out to try and explore that. And I think in Manu's novel, which is great, I really enjoyed it. He focuses on individuals, and he focuses on a certain individuals who, he identifies their hypocrisy really beautifully and really well. And for me, when I came to my idea, I wanted to look at, kind of all of our complicity in this, not just one person, but everyone's. And it's interesting because our novels are quite similar in that they explore some of the same things, but they're very different also.
Actually, Prayaag's mention of class reminds me of a story that I did for Economic Times on the vegetarian fundamentalism in Bombay, in one of the most expensive real estates of Bombay. I'm mostly vegetarian myself, so in case you're thinking I'm biased. But Sanjay Narang, hotelier, he was telling me that he wanted to open a non-vegetarian restaurant on Malabar Hill. And the residents said that there can be no non-vegetarian restaurant. They don't even allow eggs, actually. People hide eggs. The shops, they used to hide eggs, but now you can't sell eggs. So, but he rebelled. He said that the law allows me, and he opened a non-vegetarian restaurant on the ground floor of a building. And on the day of the opening, the residents stood in the balcony and spat on every patron who visited the restaurant. So it's it's a very serious issue, actually. So I'm sorry, I was just reminded of that. What Prayaag's novel mentions though it appears futuristic. It's already there in our cities. And also, I want to mention one moment which was, I thought, very powerful in his novel, where he makes an observation that people really are not bothered about what you have gone through. It is how you appear before them that they remember. So his novel is filled with powerful statements and complexities like that. But I also remember one thing he mentioned. I mean, a character is looking back at a fight with her husband, and she's not sure if they had this fight before the baby or after the baby. And I knew that this guy is not experienced enough, because you always remember the fight, whether it's before the baby or after the baby.
Right. Well, I'll find out soon enough.
No, so it's very interesting that you both brought up this thing about how like I feel the starting elements of your books, while of course I'm sure you arrived at them completely differently, are there are so many overlaps. Like with Manu's novel, you get this fantastic sense of there are all these really eccentric but very identifiable characters that are scattered throughout this book, and they interact in very strange ways, and he spares absolutely no one. With Prayaag's book, you start off with what you think is a familiar set of characters, but then he crawls deeper and deeper under their skin, again sparing no one. It's not just liberal hypocrisy, which both of you are fantastic in handling, but you go do this interesting cross-section of society, whether laterally or vertically. And I, for one, felt both exhausted and deeply sad and enraged after reading both of these books. So, and what's even more interesting for me about your book especially is that it has a comedic tone in a very dark comedy way, though only terrible things happen, so maybe I'm just a pervert. But I wanted to know, when you're does a novel allow you to deal with emotions that journalism doesn't, and if so, is long form the best way to deal with those things?
See, the only thing you can't do in journalism is you can't get inside the mind of a person. That's not allowed, because, I mean, if you get into the mind of a person, I think there is something very serious which is going on, and that is the story in itself. But the difference between fiction and journalism, chiefly, apart from the fact that in fiction you can make up stuff, is that you can get inside the minds of people. And that is where fiction draws all its power from. But on the question of class that Samit talked about, and this is something which Prayaag also does very well in his novel, and how we deal with, I mean, the middle class seems to be very moralistic about many things, but the way we deal with the maids and the drivers, actually that is a very political relationship which we don't realize. Actually, I remember, if you remember the maids from your childhood till now, so they would probably you'll remember them when you start this video. You remember them sitting on the floor, and possibly they've reached the footstool now. I don't think there's any Indian family where the helps actually sit on par with people like us and eat. Now, this is a political statement because we have so many complaints about politics, but Indian politics is the revenge of the poor. They are talking back at us through politics, and for all the confusion that we seem to have on, why are these people electing people like this? The response is that they have contempt for us, and they are expressing this contempt through Indian politics.
There was something very interesting that Manu writes about in his novel, which is, the sort of, what is the line you use about activism? Activism is the revenge of, activism is,
There's a long passage in italics
where
Manu goes, I think it's like a cross-country tour of different segments of Indian society and skewers each one of them.
Okay, so I think I'll help them. I'll try to speak in italics. It says that when the elite of a system becomes an underdog in another system, they're pretty pissed. Actually, I don't use pissed there, but yeah. And a moral compensation is what is known as activism. But Prayag, I would have thought that someone like you would possibly dislike that.
I did very much. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, because it's something that I disagreed with, in the sense that actually I think what actually happens is, Manu's point or theory is that activism is the preserve of a kind of newly disempowered elite. So you'll have these kind of key figures from the elite who then go out and fight, as Naxals, or join the Naxal movement, or like sort of Kobad Gandhi kind of figures who come from Bombay elite and went off into the forest, and it's beautifully depicted in the book. But what I think is, you're totally right that this is how activism has worked in India. But what I found is that what I think now, and what the internet is enabling, is this multitude of voices from really the ground up. And I see it because I've done some work in some journalism on sort of Dalit activists on Twitter, and these what happened was these kind of elite figures had co-opted these voices, co-opted these movements, and sat at the apex of these movements and said how we can sort of, from the top down, we will sort of uplift you. But and now I find a very, very sharp sense of amongst a new generation of activists who come from these communities, who come from lower caste communities, who are very intelligent, very cogent in their critique, and who are not willing, no matter how well-meaning I am or you are, they're not willing to let you speak for them. They want their own voice to be heard, and I think it's amazing. And I've made the mistake of writing about caste a few times, and I've been attacked quite roundly from the left. And I felt like I would be attacked maybe from the right, but I've been attacked from the left for writing on caste. And I think that critique holds up, because I can write about it from an academic way because I studied it in college and things like that. But to write in the personal sort of felt experience of what it is to be a low caste person in India, I've never had that. So for me, so my analysis would always be somewhat weaker. And
But that does not deny you the right to write about it. The
exactly.
people who are objecting to your writing are probably not only the Dalits, or also the Brahmins who have taken the turf, because.
Well, so it's hard to say, but I will write about exactly what I want to write about. I'll never listen to someone else telling me you can't write about this or you can write about this. That's not the way writing works, or the brain works, ideas work. But I can accept that they have a point. That there is a part of analysis that I can't bring to the table that someone else could bring, and by taking, I'd written a piece for this British website called Eon on caste in India, and and someone pointed this out. There was like, and I was like, I'm not writing a personal essay. I'm writing about from purely an academic sort of, literary sort of reworking some of the literature that already exists. And that person said, yes, I know you're not writing a personal essay, but you've taken a spot that could have gone to someone who could work in a personal analysis too. And I accept that. That's fine. It just so happened that I happened to write that piece. That's all.
Okay, which leads very nicely into something I wanted to ask both of you, which is that, okay, so you are idea people, you are storytellers, you are fact analysts, you are humans with opinions.
Very kind.
You have platforms to express these opinions. Now the thing is, you have too many platforms to express these opinions. So when you have an idea and an opinion, as someone with multiple choices of how to express it, how do you decide which one goes to, I hope you're not on Snapchat. Are you on Snapchat?
No.
Good. Which one goes to Twitter and which one becomes a novel? What is the editorial board meeting inside your head, and what does it look like?
I think different ideas have different, there are some thoughts that are expressed well on Twitter, but, if you're really trying to write a novel about, certain 2 or 3 obsessions that you've had, it's a much longer burn or slower burn or whatever.
I guess I'm also asking about distraction and focus, because these are very difficult times to retain any kind of, long idea in your head. And you're also, both your last novels have been books where a lot of ideas have kind of asserted their own hierarchies by fighting it out with each other. So decisions like how much do I editorialize over here, or which character is expressing my emotions, or how much can I distance myself from the characters in these books. These are all very fundamental calls, which I believe you've both taken very well. So if you could address how you did that.
Yeah. One, Twitter is free, so I don't give away too much. In fact, I'm always surprised at writers who are writing a lot on social media, tweeting too much, especially if it's good. If it's rubbish, it's okay. But I was like, this is completely free. It's just gone. It's like people like me sit and steal it, actually. Actually, you can sit and just go through Twitter and actually can steal some nice half thoughts, which can actually become something. But when you're working on a novel, and this is a training as when I grew up in Chennai, and what Chennai teaches you is that if it's important, be secretive first. If you're not being very secretive, that is your body telling you that it is not very important to you anyway. You're actually, it's almost like a chronicle of the death foretold. You're telling others so that people tell you don't do it, you know. So I mean, nobody, in fact, except in my house where there's serious domestic issues, nobody else even knows I'm working on this. In fact, for Serious Men and Illicit, I had offices where people thought I was working on journalism, but I was writing my novels. But suddenly for my third novel, I had to work from home, and it was horrible. Even though as a man, I can shut the door and it's not a big surprise, but even I just struck me how many times people ring the doorbell. So I stopped opening the door, which led to very serious domestic issues. And then I think people have this impression that if the South Indian has not opened the door, he has died of heart attack. I have a feeling that there is a correlation that people make, and then one driver, in fact, tried to enter my room through the balcony to see if I'm dead. So the opening the door. So there, in fact, most of it is not literally intellectual problems that you face. It's stuff like this. You open the door and there's a guy holding a courier, and you have to sign and write your mobile number on it. It's the most meaningless. I don't want this courier. And I'm not going to give you my real mobile number anyway, but it's such a meaningless thing. But it is actually 5 minutes, and then you will take another 15, 20 minutes to get back. And of course, there is social media in the middle of all this. You have to really switch off the internet if you want to write a novel. I feel that you can't do this. So unless you are stealing, but I'm very surprised at giving away anything. You know, even if it is just a line, it's a line. You know, a novel is made up of lines that matter. These are thoughts, and if these are not important thoughts, why tweet in the first place? What I like about social media is you can sit and people are giving away their entire lives to you, and then they'll bitch about Aadhaar. But they are telling me everything. I know everything about people. In fact, what surprised me is people I thought were very normal, likable people. And I say normal because they have 2 kids. For some reason, I feel that people with 2 children, exactly 2 children, will be normal. It's something symmetric, or maybe it's a family planning campaigns training.
It's subliminal programming.
Yes, totally. But
you only have one child, right?
I have only one child. You know, that was a hint I was. But suddenly they would get angry about all kinds of things, about dogs and cats, and anything would make them angry. You know, should there be Hindi in the Indian passport? That's it. You can also experiment with them. Just say something which you don't mean, but just say it. And there'll be a pattern of behavior, enraged behavior. So I think social media for writers should be not something, a place where you give away too much, but you keep taking. Like in the anyway.
I mean, I definitely agree with that point about the internet, turning off the internet when you're writing. You know what I actually found myself doing was I would turn, because it took me a long time to write the novel, and it's especially for the first novel, I think it's a very difficult process because you're constantly questioning yourself, questioning your own ability, questioning your, you know, does anyone want to read this at all? Will anyone read this at all? And what I found actually was quite useful was, you know, I think a lot of writers turn to, you know, like a lot of writers read like, you know, Nabokov and Ian McEwan or whoever for inspiration. And I, of course, I have many inspirations and many literary inspirations, but what I found myself doing was I would go to, you know, a few blogs, like, you know, some people had put up their own first novels or first fictions, and I would read that and kind of this is all published fiction, and I would read that and be like, Acha, if this person can write this bilge and put it up, get published, then even I deserve even I deserve a chance to write. So you can find inspiration in the oddest places. It's not just the great, the great writers who inspire you. It's also mediocre writers and bad writers who you're like, Acha, I also deserve a chance to write. I also deserve a spot, a publisher.
Speaking of mediocre and bad writers, um, I want. I wanted to.
I think I guessed the question.
No, I actually wanted to ask you. Given that the literary world and say the world of literary festivals and literary criticism and the increasingly shrinking bubble of kind of the literary, given your observation of it and given sort of that you're both people who are sort of professional observers of situations, I want you to tell us about a book that you hope you never write and the kind of writer that you hope you never become.
That's not a good question at all.
All right then, tell us instead about what you think your next novels will be. I mean, answer one or the other.
I've just started researching a second novel, and it's way too early to talk about. But I'm trying to write something about. I'm very interested in how, our understanding of what we consider, our own arts, Indian arts, and we have these kind of set notions about them from our childhood. NCRT. I was in Delhi, and this, even in Calcutta, of course, the NCRT textbooks. This kind of textbook interpretations of our own arts, and our arts actually have very fascinating histories. And they've evolved and shaped, and so I'm just starting to read about one specific art form. That's all I'm going to tell you.
As you know, I'm secretive. About
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I really should have said that. I've already said too much.
He was waiting for you to finish so that he could then say, I'm not giving mine away, thus immediately raising his price, which is what people do in these situations.
The
Okay.
smarter people.
So,
But it's very strange. I get so many ideas for stories which I know I will never write. Does it happen to you?
absolutely.
Yeah, but it's like you don't know, and these are not bad ideas, but you know you will never write them.
While having them sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's very.
I'm really interested actually to ask you, Manu, because I reviewed Manu's first novel, Serious Men, which I loved, and I wrote this like kind of long, maybe 800,000 word review for the newspaper I worked with, and then I bumped into him somewhere I think in Jaipur, and I went up to him and said, hi, I really loved your novel, and this was years ago, 2010. So I said, I really loved your novel, but in the last paragraph, and of course Manu remembered the one criticism I'd made of his book, which was the last paragraph of my review. I'd written it was about a scientist and the peon who works in his office, and it was what was it? It was sort of the scientist sends up hot air balloons into space, and they collect particles and it comes back down, and there was something he was able to decipher something about it. I'm very bad with science, but so I assumed that this was a novelist, like a novelist's imagination. I didn't think hot air balloons could go into space and come back down. I didn't understand any of it. So I wrote that, this is, you could tell that it's this is a great fiction writer who's sort of made a hacky attempt at writing about science, but it's such a beautiful book in so many other ways. And Manu remembered this of my review, and he was like, oh yeah, you're the fellow who did this, you're the chap who wrote this review. I liked your review, but actually this is what a scientist actually, a scientist had actually done this, an Indian scientist.
How long had you waited to say this time?
It's probably months. He's like, I'm going to find this guy. But my point is,
It's to a height of 21 kilometers actually.
Right.
Not speed, yeah.
but
no more, no less.
So, my question to you is because, again, that was something that came from an incident. You probably read a news item about it or something, and then, you use that to expand into like this beautiful narrative about, that explores caste, that explores privilege. And even with your latest novel, Miss Laila, it's kind of about, I don't know if I should say, it's kind of about something that happened in the news and was very important to us. And really, when you come to the end of the novel, you feel, the way he ties everything together, you feel sick. You actually feel physically like, I mean, at least I did. I felt really moved and shaken by it. And by the way, he ties these threads together, which come from the news, and he's linked things that are not linked in our media, because of certain reasons. Because this is something that fiction allows. So I'm very curious to know how you use that kind of starting point, and then maybe like a 60-word news item, and you expand it into this huge and very layered story.
Yeah. No, I don't think it always expands from a piece of news. You basically marinate in a story or an emotion. And now the balloon thing is talking about. It started off when I met a scientist called Jayant Narlikar, whom I interviewed when I was at Outlook, and he was saying that the Big Bang theory is a lot of bullshit, and I immediately liked him. Because, and then he said that this is a total Christian propaganda, because Bible says in the beginning was the word, and all the white people want to believe that something began from something. And it made complete sense to me, not because I'm a Christian, but it's just like, exactly, why should there be a beginning? He says, when did Indians believe that there was a beginning? Why should there be a beginning? Why should there be these are all Western constructs, he said. He was an astrophysicist. And so he had a parallel theory which was questioning the Big Bang, and it was all very beautifully tragic because he was losing the battle. And the great intelligent loser is always such a beautiful literary character, and that's when I felt that there is a novel there. And another thing is, when you're thinking of these things, you're doing it alone. But here, if I came here and I discussed the story and I saw your faces, actually, you all look very serious, actually. I don't know what happened. but if I'm going to look at all the serious faces, I'd probably just kill the novel immediately, because you feel that maybe it's not going to work, and maybe there is no connection with the people, etc., etc. But because you think of these things, I think a novel grows because of a lot of misunderstanding that you have about the worth of the story, and you let the delusion grow. Without that, I don't think a novel is possible.
Okay, I'm going to do another question, then I think I'm going to go 2 questions from them, which is something that actually, Prayaag, your comment about the review started off, which is that, see, as journalists and editors, you're used to people, throwing praise and blame at whatever's in the paper or magazine, which usually has nothing to do with what is actually in it. As novelists, do you find it, I mean, I know you're both used to handling conflict and criticism of any work that you're doing, but what is your relationship with praise? Because you've both received a lot of it, but is it something that you just love and enjoy, or is it something that makes you deeply uncomfortable and combative? Elaborate on.
All yours.
I think, speaking personally, it makes me deeply uncomfortable, because I don't know why. Honestly, it's what you do it for. You just sort of set out to write, and you hope to be praised one day, and you spend years and years down some strange tunnel of your own making. You're going down this thing and trying to write this novel, and you hope that people will like it. But then when people actually, and I've been very lucky in the the way the novel was received. Then you're immediately suspicious. You're like, why is this person saying such nice things? What do they want? But it's really, it's. I mean, I've been very lucky, and it's actually why you set out to do it. You want to be praised, you want to be liked, you want your work to be read. But when it's actually happening, it always feels some vaguely unreal and unsettling.
Manu, I want a deeply emotional answer from you.
About what praise does to me, I'm going to be very, very secretive again. I'll just say that it feels like a nice warm water bath, and I really wish people would write their compliments in small, nice notes and just leave it on my desk so that I sit in. But sometimes, really, honestly, sometimes these days, in these political times, the greatest compliment you can get is a particular kind of an idiot who hates you. And when the idiot hates you, you know that you're beginning to do something right. And when the idiot is angry, you know that you've got it.
No, but Manu, anyone who follows you on any platform or Twitter books knows that you love it when idiots hate you. I'm talking about the opposite thing. Yeah. I'm talking about the exact opposite thing, You've won awards. You've so when someone, instead of saying something horrible to you or about you to your face or in print, comes and tells you that they really loved your book and it made them feel things, do you make exactly the shifty expression you're making now?
Yeah, you really feel that it was all worth it, and that there, and it's great to be of use, and it's great to be. It's like almost like being in love, where there's so much you have to give, but I know you. It's also nice to get it back sometimes. Uh, and it doesn't happen. What is interesting about this kind of praise? It doesn't happen very often. There are systems that you have to follow, and it doesn't happen very often, at least in my case. So it is. But writers should never look at it as endorsement, I feel, and also deep down, I always want to say, but I don't owe you anything. But I don't say it. But I want to say, because you want to, you don't want to feel very delicate enough not to attempt a few things. A person can praise you. Like, for example, in Serious Men, it was about compassion. They kept calling me a compassionate writer, and I was like wondering, oh, well, that might be true. None of my girlfriends ever said that. So this is something I would like to hear. And am I compassionate? I was like, but that could have really interfered in my third novel, because third novel is not a compassionate novel. It shows no compassion for anybody, and that is exactly what I wanted to achieve, as a lack of compassion as a form of anthropology.
Lovely. Okay, so we're going to go to audience questions now. Please keep questions brief and no, I have two comments and a question situations. Yeah. So do we have volunteers with mics? Yeah.
Okay, Manu, this is for you. And I hugely enjoyed the book. That's okay. But one of my favorite parts is the way you take pot shots at icons across the spectrum, particularly the liberals, our friends. So you have answered this question in some form, but I would like to hear it from you, that why did you decide to do it the way you did?
Okay. Because I was part of the same system at one point, and I could see them. Like I said, when I was an editor, as I said, you don't know a socialist until he asks for a raise. And I come to Delhi and I see all these very righteous people who I thought most of them were charlatans, because they really were not. I feel that liberalism is a gigantic ideal, and essentially it is about the idea. I think it is the greatest invention of human beings, that the strong should take care of the weak, and it is, to me, that's all. Everything just falls into that, and I feel that there is an exploitation of this powerful idea to project the righteousness of people. Like, for example, Arundhati Roy, when she talks about, oh, Mukesh Ambani is in the. I'll give you a moment from my book where you read. Where a character, a prankster, is reading from Arundhati Roy's essay, where she's making fun of Mukesh Ambani's huge house in Bombay, and she's shooting a film, and then the film cuts to Arundhati Roy's house in Delhi, which is also a very big flat. Exactly. So it is. So I grant that hypocrisy is a fundamental right. So liberals as intellects should go beyond it. What can you say beyond these obvious things? Because if you fail, the consequences are huge. And if you're going to be just involved in virtue signaling and promoting your righteousness, what the other side, as it's happening to us, what can happen? The consequences of the liberal failure is what we are seeing all around. Don't forget, Donald Trump is the most powerful man on earth. That's like Rakhi Sawant of politics. So so who were supposed to protect us? That is my question. So these were the liberal guardians were supposed to protect us. And if you fail, what I'm saying is, you keep saying Rahul Gandhi has to be sacked. But then this whole liberal industry is filled with Rahul Gandhis, whom you can't sack, because they would keep doing what they're doing. So my argument is that if you're not up to the mark, then leave. But they won't leave. Then they know exactly what makes us emotional. They'll hold on to it. They'll create a paranoia around Aadhaar. They will say that farmers are dying because of these reasons. They will say a Dalit scholar died because of these reasons. And when you go against their hypothesis, they will say you've crossed over to the dark side. I think all of them are reading Harry Potter. All of them. And they will also not exactly like Lord Voldemort, they won't name him also. I was sitting in a panel discussion, they're not naming this guy. I said, call him Modi, he's the Prime Minister.
I think we have a question over there.
Good evening. My question is to both of you. I'm just interested and curious to know that Indian writing has become very popular over the ages. So when you write a novel, I just want to know the importance of the mother tongue. Like when you create characters and all, do you go back to thinking and imagining in your mother tongue?
This is I come from a kind of mixed religious and my parents are of different religions and they're from different parts of the country. So I've never actually had a mother tongue as opposed to, I've always felt English was my mother tongue in that sense. And so, my mother's from Kerala, but I don't speak Malayalam. So, it's actually a failing, and I've always felt, and I felt a lack because of it, because I felt like kind of like culturally, cut off from my roots because you don't speak. And language is such an important way of understanding a culture, actually. You find if you don't understand the language, you really are an alien. Even in a place like Kerala, when I go there, I feel alien to it because I don't understand the people around me and, what people are saying. Whereas when I come to Calcutta, because I was born here and I was here until I was 8 or 9 or so, I understand Bengali. I don't speak it, but I understand it, and I feel immediately at home when I come here because people are speaking a language and I recognize the city, and people are speaking a language that I understand. So for me, actually, it was a kind of blessing that because I've always wanted to write and I always wanted to write in English, that it was a blessing to me, but that I didn't. I had no baggage of another language almost. But then you also have the converse of that, where you miss out on understanding certain aspects of culture that can only be, I think, described in that language. Described in, say, Hindi literature or Bengali literature. You really feel distant from it and unable to access it. So you turned. For me, the way I did it was I turned to writers. The sort of the world of literature. I started reading a lot of foreign writers at a young age. I'm talking about Enid Blyton. I'm not trying to sound high-minded or anything. I was reading Enid Blyton, but those became my sort of my markers of my culture. It became very important to me at a young age. Books became very important to me.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm a Malayali too, but we still get along somehow. But I was born in Kerala, but I was raised in Chennai, so I would speak Malayalam, though Malayalis never called it Malayalam, what I spoke. But I could speak Tamil very well. And until the age of 16, in fact, I started speaking English consciously to sound posh. But before that, I was a very vernacular person. In fact, I know why Indians get very offended by the word vernacular, because they feel it has varna, root, and all, it's all rubbish. So I had this strange relationship with language where I would always, I would think in Tamil and Malayalam, but I would always hope in English in my mind. Even now I could never, even today I've never understood why as a boy, hope is always English, but when I was romantic, I was with this girl combing her hair in the balcony, and I would imagine that I would run with white pants and white shoes. I don't know why, maybe it's a Tamil cinema thing. It would always be Tamil. I'll be thinking about her in Tamil. But when I would think about my mother's, like I'll make this for my mother, I'll do this for my mother, it was always Malayalam, So I had this diversity which we had as Indians, which of course I've lost now, because now I think in English, except during traffic rate situation. It is bizarre. I speak Hindi so badly, but I abuse in my head in Hindi. Maybe it's a good language. It's a good language to abuse. Malayalam and Hindi are the best languages in the world to abuse. Actually, yeah.
I think this city would disagree with you on that front. Like, we have a good range.
Really?
Yeah. It's deceptive. Anyway, that's not the point of this. Oh, last question? Okay. An awesome responsibilities on your shoulders, sir.
Manu Joseph, you said that you had to, you had a career crisis and you had to swap to a new job. So if somebody came to you and said that he's having a midlife crisis and he would like to go for a career swap where the beginning of the month, there wouldn't be a ET transfer from the boss that be or your bosses. So what will be your advice to somebody who's in a state flux as far as career is concerned? Thank you.
It depends on what field. I mean, if you have say if you're the Prime Minister of India, I would say yeah, just get into writing. But I won't be meaning it. It really depends on what how confident you're feeling. That salary should be viewed as a drug. That's what it is supposed to. It's the drug that capital. It's not a useless thing. I feel that there is a lot of talk about that people fantasize that they will quit and they will do this and they will travel around the world. But as a person who was in a managerial position, what shocked me about people is that they want to come to office. I would give it like so-called freedom, actually I wanted to write my book. So I made it look like it is all freedom, it's all free office. You don't have to come to office. But they wanted to come to the office after a point. They all enjoy it for the first 2 or 3 weeks. So I think it's very I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer it because it's too subjective, and I don't want to give an advice which will really harm some person. He could be my reader, So,
So his income must be kept steady. Prayaag, do you have anything? Okay, so guys, that was our last question. Thank you all very much for coming. This is the only thing
Thank you,
came
Samit.
for. Thank you, guys. Buy the books.
Not a soul has moved. Manu and Prayaag will be signing books today and tomorrow at the bookstore. We are now, of course, we are ready. We'll just take a couple of minutes to prepare ourselves.